Microsoft will update fans on its quote vision of the future of Xbox next week, following reports that the company has decided to release more of its games on rival platforms. You could not have missed this, but over the weekend it was claimed that Bethesda Starfield and the upcoming Indiana Jones game would be released for PS5, in addition to the previously rumoured Hi-Fi Rush and Sea of Thieves. Later on in the week, it was claimed by friend of the show, Jeff Grubb, that they could be bringing the Gears of War franchise to PlayStation 2. Look, PlayStation also, not PlayStation 2. Chris String, we go to you. Cats and dogs mating. The sky is falling. Halo is on the PS Vita. How do we feel about it?
Wow, Halo on PlayStation. That was like the Sonic moment when that first appeared on Nintendo. It's interesting. It's actually not that contradictory with Xbox's entire strategy, which has been to be on as many platforms as possible. It's just up until now they only wanted to go on mobile and PC because that's where they can put their own store, maybe, or maybe it's where they could put Game Pass. They won't be able to put Game Pass or their own store on PlayStation. So this is a bit of this would be a break from that strategy. But there's a couple of things going on, right? People aren't buying that console. Microsoft's vision for the future is happening. Well, might be happening, but it's happening very slowly. Streaming hasn't taken off. Game Pass it had a big spike during the pandemic, and it's sort of growth has been slow. I think that's being polite. So their vision, even though that's still their vision, I believe, it's just not there yet. Then you've got games like Starfield, 13 million players in 3 months, big hit. But then it didn't get in the top 30 in Europe, and it was number 11 in revenue in the US. It's a Bethesda game. It's normally in the top 5.
Is there any examples of games that came to Game Pass that still sold like they would do back in the day?
Well, yes, but normally from third parties. Like Power World's a great example.
On games that are on other platforms.
Yeah, and Forza Horizon did very well. So the Forza 5, I think it was, that did very well. But generally speaking, the margin on these games must be quite. So although Game Pass is profitable, Microsoft's profitable. I have to wonder if these individual studios, these individual games, are proving to be particularly profitable. So putting them on PlayStation creates that money. But obviously we have no idea what they're exactly going to announce next week. I'd be surprised if they would damage their console business, although it is
speculate for us. Speculate what they're going to announce.
If I was going to guess, I would say they're going to announce a load of smaller games, so Hi-Fi Rush, Pentiments, those sort of games. Sea of Thieves is a live service game, that makes sense as well. And then they'll judge how that goes. And then that's maybe where we'll start seeing some of the bigger.
They're going to have some good news for Xbox owners, though, aren't they? I mean, they come out with an event now that is hugely anticipated. They've announced it. They're making everyone wait for it. They can't just come out and go, "Oh, all these Xbox fans, we're giving all your games to these people." They need to throw them a bone.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, there was maybe a new piece of hardware, but
I think they'll announce something just to kind of sweeten it.
Yeah. They did call it a business update. That was the key thing.
But I think they called it. I don't think we can read too much into what they called it because I think they're just scrambling to catch up. Right? Seems to me that there's a lot of. I mean, because you've heard and I've heard, and it seems that everyone's heard that all of these first-party games are looking into coming to PS5. Might be coming to PS5. They've got dev kits. Blah blah. I mean, Sea of Thieves we were hearing that like last year, right? This has been going on for a while, so. I think if they had something set in stone, they'd be announcing that yesterday, the day before yesterday.
Do you think this vision of the future? I mean, when I saw that Phil Spencer had tweeted this, for me, it felt very reactionary, and not that they didn't have a plan for the future there. The way I saw it was news got out, it spiraled out of control, and Phil may have been forced to say we're going to bring this announcement further forward because it doesn't seem particularly sensible that you would have a developer direct which talks about a vision of an Xbox future and then 3 or 4 weeks have a planned, and by the way, we're also doing this. Maybe you would because it's the end of the financial year, but do you think that this is a response to the furor online and then them saying we'll explain afterwards?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and I think that's a lot of people's beef with Xbox over the last 10 years is that they've always been reactionary, right? Everything feels like a reaction. They're never kind of leading from the front.
Which is odd because strategically, I would argue, as a business, they are trying to change the game industry,
absolutely.
right?
And that's the funny thing about this is that there's nothing really that should be surprising, right? this is all within keeping of kind of what they've been saying and what they've been
The-
kind of building towards for a decade now.
Do you know what the biggest third-party game on Nintendo Switch is?
Minecraft.
Minecraft.
Right, the biggest third-party game, the biggest game on PlayStation is Call of Duty, Microsoft owned. And in fact, even if you go back to Microsoft always published games on PC when PlayStation and Nintendo would never do that. You remember we're Rare fans, in the first 6 years of Rare being a Microsoft studio, they released more games on Game Boy Advance and DS than they had on the Xbox they owned, because Microsoft were like, yeah, it's fine. And they've always had that slightly more easygoing attitude to sort of, as long as it didn't compete with what they were doing. And that's the thing we'll see, I think, is next week, is they're not going to try and undermine their business, but they're going to do things that make sense.
I mean, I'm surprised they haven't put Sea of Thieves on PS5 and it's on PC, isn't it? On PS5 sooner.
Yeah, well,
Games like that, it makes complete sense. I mean, if anything, it increases the perceived value of Game Pass, right? Like, that's what's going to happen with Call of Duty, and that's what I've been saying for ages. I mean, I play Call of Duty a lot with friends who own PS5s, and when you tell them, oh, by the way, soon you'll just get that as part of a subscription on Xbox, they're like, what? Really?
Microsoft are not going to be doing this decision because they think they want to make less money. They will have looked at the books and gone, well,
absolutely.
we have access to all of these things. What is the best financial decision to be making at this time, and how in the next 5-10 years, because they are looking to the future, how can we make the most money out of this? And they see it, maybe it isn't an Xbox physical box only future. It's an ecosystem that they are creating.
Yeah,
that you buy
and to
into.
Chris's point, Starfield, if that was on PS5, would have been at the top of the charts, right?
yeah, it would have
People would have been buying it, and people would have been paying it on Game Pass.
It would have got better review scores as well if it was on PlayStation.
yeah.
Let's move on from that.
Exclusivity is it is what it is, but also when you know that you're going to sell fewer copies of a game because it's available in fewer places, what you're doing is you're saying, if you buy this, we hope that you will also buy the box, because this is the only
Of course,
place that
yeah,
you
it
can
only
play
makes
it.
sense if you're making money from the
And
hardware that you're selling for that, right?
Exactly.
And the peripherals, etc.,
The,
etc.
the positive side of exclusivities, I've always said this, and there's few people tweeting about it, I didn't reply to them, but is that sometimes people commission games that wouldn't have sold. Like Nintendo, I always use Metroid as an example. It's the smallest franchise Nintendo own. It must cost a fortune to make. Yet Nintendo always commission it because they know that people buy the console to play Metroid, and then that sells more games and sells more controllers. So it's the value of that game is more than the sale of the game. But
I was so happy when Metroid Prime Remastered came out that I went and bought some shit Switch games. I'm going to buy ARMS. And I bought another Joy-Con.
You might buy a Switch, but it brings people into the ecosystem, and that's the play with
But
it.
I mean, we're kind of like, we're walking a bit further down the path than we're necessarily at, right? Because all we know is that from what we're hearing, that these discussions are going on, but it doesn't mean it's actually going to happen. It doesn't mean Starfield's going to come out on PS5, blah, blah, blah. So we are kind of walking a bit further down the path than where we're actually at right now. But if that is the case, and it's like, well, we're bringing out 6-7 games, first-party games, especially like big, significant ones like Gears of War and Starfield, it does feel a little bit like the beginning of the end of an era, doesn't it? And it comes back to, do you remember when Phil Spencer said that they lost the most important generation to lose?
Yeah.
And it's absolutely true. You can see that, right? Because I was watching a video last night, the Nate the Hate podcast, where the chap from Digital Foundry was on there, and they were talking about Switch 2. And they were talking about how after every successful Nintendo console, they basically bring out one and bomb, right? Because they've got to rebuild the audience again and start from scratch. And Nintendo are clearly very, very aware of that from what they've been saying. And it made me think about that even more because, so Phil Spencer said, because it was the most important, the worst generation to lose, PS4 and Xbox One, because everyone built their digital libraries. And I remember that feeling significant as well. When you bought PS5 and you bought Series X, you turn them on, all your games were there. It didn't feel like other generations at all. It didn't feel like a new clean slate, like a new platform. It just felt like the same one.
Yeah.
And that comes to Switch as well, right? Where it's kind of like the discussion they were having on the other podcast was like, well, do they have to reinvent the wheel, Nintendo, in order to give people another reason to get? Because Switch is the first Nintendo platform where everyone's got their digital library there.
And these things,
people are not going to give up their games, right?
And what we don't talk about, because it's a very businessy thing, is what we call network effects, right? So if you've got immediately an audience of people who are just upgrading because they've got their digital libraries, because they're playing, their friends play it, and that causes a cycle of success. And that's why it's always like, begin with, it used to be the race to 10 million. You get to 10 million first, you've got that. You get your mates get it, and your friends get it, and whoever is in second or third place, that's where they're going to stay. And And that's the thing. So when PlayStation last year, analysts, including myself, predicted that Xbox would gain market share because they had the cheapest console. There's economic uncertainty going on, and they had a decent lineup of games. And the opposite happened. They lost it, and that was, I think, the biggest sign that Phil Spencer was right. They've already lost. They've been defeated. But the last company that got defeated by PlayStation, properly defeated by PlayStation, was Nintendo. At the end of the GameCube generation, they lost. And so Nintendo went, we're going to have to change. We're going to have to do something different. We have to go for audiences and reach people that PlayStation isn't talking to. And the result was Nintendo have now launched 5 consoles since then, 3 of them over 100 million units, 3 of them more successful than the PlayStation equivalent at the time. And so that's what Xbox should be. I think they won't be looking to do a Wii, but they should be looking to.
And I think it's going to pay off. I really do. I think they're being forced, 1 or 2 generations ahead, because that's the future, right? I mean, PlayStation will do fine because it has that existing audience, as you said, with their friends and their digital libraries. They're going to buy a PS6, for that reason. Like games on it, blah blah. But at some point, consoles are just going to be an option, right? I mean, we're basically there. Yeah. People are already playing their games on their Steam Deck or on their PC or in the cloud, and that's only going to get bigger.
Well, we're talking about this from a business sense, because obviously that's what I do, but I'm also really conscious of the emotional impact of this, because I used to be, I was saying before this podcast, I used to be a fanboy. So when I was a kid, I used to be I used to be a
We're always fanboys at heart.
Yeah,
come on.
But I was a proper Nintendo fanboy. I had my N64. I loved it. It was my favorite thing. It was where I hung out with my friends. It was more than just a box under the TV, right? It was my friendships, the websites I went to, the forums but it was my home and it was my world. And then and I hated PlayStation. And for no reason. I never owned one. I never played any of the games. I hated it because it was a threat to the thing I loved. So, I loved this thing. I became afraid for its future. And so I hated the thing. It was the Yoda journey. And so when I see this sort of, fanboyism, I think is a blight on the industry. But I know where it comes from. It comes from this love of this.
Yeah.
This
I mean, I totally empathise with that, as clearly you do. But I do think Microsoft have kind of played up to that to a dangerous level, right? Where I do think to a certain extent, you do look at some of the reaction to this and you think to yourself, but this isn't surprising. They've been telling you that. But at the same time, they have been kind of doing the console thing and all the rest of it, when really that's not really, it feels a little, when something like this potentially happens, it does feel a little bit smoke and mirrors, because it was never about the consoles then, and they were sort of saying that, but at the same time they're doing the big bombastic press conferences and flying over all the fans and having breakfast with them and giving people Xbox haircuts, and
the Xbox have done a fantastic job.
Yeah, they have
of promoting a brand. You see green, you think Xbox. Like when I was at the Game Awards this year, I was in this very bizarre position where we were queuing up to go in, and I kind of crossed in front of Phil and Sarah. They were all there, and they were all wearing green. They all had hints of green in them, and it was brilliant. It's just it's subtle understanding of the brand that they build, and the strength of the Xbox brand has been in its personalities, and not just like Phil Spencer is just that incredible combination of power and availability. It's like he is head and shoulders above you in what he can do, but at the same time he could come around and like have a beer with you and have a chat. You speak about that famous thing where he said it was the worst generation to lose. We remember where that interview was because Phil went on personally onto that podcast and said those things. And
I spoke to the PR afterwards, and she was like, he insisted on doing that
because he has that ability, and they have that ability to, and the way they project themselves, the developer direct, it's all about people first. How do we show the humanity behind all of this? And they've also then promoted these other people up, these influencers who believe in the brand. They believe in their football team, essentially. It's like, if you love a football team, you're going to go to bat for them, and you've asked to build a brand around that. And then now what these rumors are is that we're going to past 2 years has been the only place to play these is on Xbox. The only place to play them is on Xbox. And now there's rumors that maybe that isn't the only place to play them. You can understand how people have got themselves in an emotional tailspin about it.
Absolutely. Because this is not a sports team.
No,
it's $1 trillion company.
Yeah.
And if sports teams were companies, they wouldn't be competing to win.
Yeah.
They would be staying mid-table and keeping all the cash in the locker, right? Their interest is not to make their fans happy. It's to make more money.
It's really it's a fascinating thing to look at, and from someone who I know I've never owned an Xbox. I've been in the PlayStation ecosystem since PlayStation 1. But I love Xbox games. I go around to my mates and play Xbox games. I've just never owned them because I'm now in the trophy system, right? Like that's what I do.
I mean, it's exactly to Phil's point.
Yeah.
Once you're in, I mean, I had a original Xbox was my main console other than GameCube. I didn't get a PS2 till the end of that gen when I started this job and needed a PS2 to review games and stuff. 360, best console of that gen. Xbox One.
It's so frustrating how they messed up the 360. Right? They were kings coming out of that generation, and then
it's the hubris. It's the hubris, right?
Yeah.
Well, like I remember, you kind of see it. If it wasn't for the digital library thing, that I believe that PlayStation would suffer the same fate, because you see the hubris at PlayStation now, but of course people are just not going to move. But I remember I worked at Bandai Namco for about 2 months during just after that gen, Xbox One, PS4. And I remember all the talk. It was like, on 360, we used to show all our games on 360 dev kits, but now we do it on PS4 because the third-party team used to be non-existent on Sony, on PS3, and now it's the other way around. Like, Microsoft have got rid of all of that, but the hubris takes in is, we don't need that.
I think the 360 generation is an interesting one to analyze, because I think the 360's popularity, and this may be a controversial thing to say, its success was because it was the best place to play third-party games.
Definitely.
It was the place where you'd go. It was, I mean, remember that generation of PlayStation 3, Xbox 360. People were playing your Call of Duties. You were playing all of your multiplayer games with your friends in that ecosystem. And then PlayStation pivoted and went, right, no one's going to play third-party games on our... So we have to create
amazing first-party games.
And that is now how the generation has shifted. And, you're looking at people... their losses turning it into their future successes. It's like, how do we change? And PlayStation pivoted in that generation.
Yeah, well, that's what Nintendo did with the generation before. They were hammered at the GameCube. I mean, we've got to go after something new. We've got to do something to react to it, and that's where the Wii came into it, and the DS. And actually, Nintendo had to do it again after the Wii U. Apple had come along and eaten their lunch. They went, we need to do something different, and that's where the Switch came into it. And that's actually why we can. It's not a failure, as Ian Livingston, who's a very big investor in video games, was involved in the launch of Tomb Raider. He always says failure is just success, work in progress. And if Xbox are going through a moment of they're the second biggest games company in the world, if they're going through a period of transition, the result is to be more successful at the end of it. And even though it can be a bit upsetting, I think,
it just doesn't feel like the console, being a console player is just not the strength that it used to be, right? I mean, even you think about even 10 years ago, you'd have retail placement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a huge advantage. Whereas now it pretty much doesn't exist. You're in there with 14,000 Steam games, that come out every year. That's what you're competing with. You're competing with, to what you've said many times before, not money, but time.
Yeah.
You're now in the same space as every game, big and small. You're not the gatekeeper. You can't go, we're going to let these, 20 good indie games on. Everything's in there together. Something like Power World, as we've seen, has absolutely exploded out of nowhere.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the console space in particular, if you look, so PS2 sold 150 million consoles, and then GameCube and Xbox was around 20 million each, 190 million players. Then you throw in 360 and PS3, that was 86 and 80, so that's about 170 million players. You can include Wii on top of that, but I'd argue that Nintendo was going different then. And then the following generation, it's about 190 million players. So actually, the console industry,
it's been the same since the 90s.
Same size. People are aging out. People get to get older and go, I have time for this anymore. And new people are coming through. Whereas, they're all competing for the same level of audience. They're all having to get more money out of the same group of people, which they've very successfully done over the last 20 years. But there comes a point when you just have to find new customers. And the best way to find new customers is to put your games on other platforms.
And that's the sad thing, really, for lots of the Xbox fans who are hurting now, is that 30 million, kind of audience, I think that's the last number, right, ish, owners of Xbox at the moment. That's not Microsoft are looking to, there's these guys, or there's the hundreds of millions on mobile and PC, and potentially hundreds more on cloud, where, that's where our value is going to go. Because again, it's not a sports team, it's a business. We're going to go make our money over there. Sorry, guys.
Well, just before this podcast, you were showing us Resident Evil 4 on iPhone, right? And it's like, how long before we're not that far away from iPhones being able to produce those sort of quality games? And okay, people in the West, people in the UK and US and stuff, we're still going to use our consoles. But for places like India, where there's huge industry, mobile is where you're going to have to put your games if you want to reach them, and that's what Xbox want to do.
Yeah.
Well, we will find out soon enough what the plan is. My thoughts and prayers with all the Xbox influencers we've lost during this difficult time.